This is just me and how I am with my listeners. I really do feel like I have to say, Robbie's black. That's why I'm laughing about slavery. Robbie's black. It's not three white dudes chuckling about slavery.
Oh my God.
Men who orgasm regularly may have a slightly lowered rate of prostate cancer.
Wow.
And then there's the immediate effects. It is stress relief. It is a flood of endorphins. It is relaxation. It's, it can lighten the mood.
Yo, what's up? Check this out. All right, so I'm going to do a little bragging. The first reason for bragging is just selfish reasons, like all bragging, but I'll give you the second reason here in a second. So somehow I stumbled across your podcast in 2021, and I find it the one that I return to the most. Why? Because your honesty about your life struggles and doubts. You have a loving spirit, too. So thank you. I'm an evangelical Christian, having come to faith in Christ in 1973. I've been a churchgoer and Bible reader ever since. Most of all, Jesus has won my heart. Although I don't agree with all of your doctrinal positions, you have helped me listen to differing opinions with an open mind. And I so enjoy when you have Chip Judd on. I find him interesting. A bit about me. I was the first in my family to come to faith in Jesus. As far as I know, for generations, the doctrine of hell was never easy, but became much worse when my dad got cancer and died in 1980 as an unbeliever. I think I always had panic disorder, but that kicked off 9 straight years of daily panic attacks, imagining what happened to him. Through therapy and a recovery program, the panic attack stopped in 1989. I don't know how I managed staying out of the hospital during those years. I couldn't be inside. I couldn't be outside either. It was a hell all its own. I'm thankful for where I am today, although I have a propensity towards fear still. I can feel you on that one. Me too. Anyway, I wanted to reach out. Thank you. I appreciate you. She's praying for me. Dorothy Bethel, thank you so much. And honestly, the reason I read that is because it proves my theory that this podcast really is a safe listen for all walks of faith and unfaith. Now, I use the word safe. Basically, what I mean is no one's going to come to this podcast thinking that the people on this podcast think they're dumbasses. I never want to do that. So thank you so much, Dorothy Bethel. I also met some patrons, Steve and Adele Densham, and they gave me a wonderful compliment also. He said the reason why he listens is just sincere. Or shall I say the reason why he's listened to every single episode is my sincerity. And I'll tell you this, if this podcast is known just for one thing, and that's sincerity, I'm cool with that. So let me tell you a little bit about our patrons. So last episode, I let my friend Wisket come on here and read all the names of our patrons. He's been wanting to come on this podcast for a long time. He thinks he's a hip hop star. He's not that funny. But anyway, he got on there and he said, yeah, I just want to read them and it'll be a good way for me to be on the show. All right. So I kid you not. After he read that, and I'm not joking, I increased my patron income by $105. Now here's the thing about this. I think he's only responsible for one of them. So he did this witty joke. One of our patrons is Jacob Scott Moore, and he said something along the lines of, Jacob Scott Moore, I want more of your money. So Jacob Scott Moore listened to Wisket and increased his giving from 10 to 15. Now, I don't think that I have a friend who supports me in this podcast, and she just decided to go from 5 to 100. She's like, man, this is part of my church. I give to my church. And I know a lot of people are just like, a podcast is not a church. That's messed up. Really? Like having open conversations and discussing things and pushing back on each other and listening to one another and learning from each other and loving one another through the whole thing as we seek God doesn't sound like church to you? Okay. Well, anyway, Wisket doesn't get credit for Jen's increase. He just doesn't. But he is beside himself, walking around like he's just some unbelievable superstar saying, what's up, $105, give me the credit, I need to come back on here, and all of that. So honestly, I have gotten a lot of good response from you guys. You liked Wisket, so he probably will be coming back on. But I got to let him kind of cool off a little bit because he's just on a high. And I think he also smoked a little bit of you-know-what, so he's just like, he's in a different place right now. You patrons, I want you to excuse me, those of you that are not patrons, let me just tell you a little bit about the basic plan. It's called the collection plate. You have access to the interviews as they're going live. You have access to the recorded content right when it's recorded, unedited. You have your own podcast feed for that. You have a community that you get to talk to and get to know. Not everybody takes advantage of that, but some people like that. You have a public junk drawer that has pictures for the creepy patrons and quarterly hangouts. Our next one is with Brandon Robertson about his new book. Anyway, lots of stuff going on. And let me tell you this, the Boom Boom Room is coming. Okay. The Boom Boom Room is coming. So if you want to go to the Patreon page and just check some things out, I'd love for you to do that. And if you don't want to do that, you know what? That's fine too. It really is fine. All right. So this show coming up, I'm not knocking evangelicals here, but let's face it. We have believed some crazy stuff, especially pertaining to sex. So if things worked out how I was taught, God is either a monster of a God or just not one that thinks these things through. And God not thinking something through enough. And people will call me out, and I'm not saying anything about people, like especially my life. I'm not talking about any people or situations or anything. So just hear me out. I'm making a general observation here of the game plan that I was given in youth group growing up. So this is God's posture. All right, we're going to give them a natural ability to get hits of drugs that's kind of paired with their sexuality, an orgasm. This is going to get really intense. When you're stressed, you want to escape, you're lacking self-control, you're really going to want that release, but also just the natural drive and arousal that God gave you as a gift. Oh, and there'll be a lot of people just like you feeling the same way that are after the same thing, and this is going to ramp up big time around the time you are the least mature. So then, now hear this. If you mess up, youngin', teenager, with all this considered, you're still going to be tortured forever. So thank you, fundamentalist Christian. So let's back up a little bit. Let's back up and like literally, do you know with our modern technology, it takes 1 to 3 days to get to the moon, 150 to 300 days to get to Mars. I don't know if this stuff is accurate. It seemed accurate. It seemed like a legit website. The end of our solar system, 40 years. The nearest star, 80,000 years. The nearest galaxy, it would take 749 million years. The end of the known universe, 225 trillion years. So let me tell you some more. If we assume the universe is about 13.7 billion years old and modern humans exist for the last 200,000 years, that makes the percentage of time that humans have existed not 0.0, but 0.00146%. The entire universe is about as big as the Empire State Building. If that was the case, our entire galaxy is a mere crumb sitting in the middle of it. So I guess what I'm saying is, could there really be such a huge, smart, superior God who makes natural urges and he's deeply troubled and angered by us messing this up? Is this okay with everyone? Like, no smart gods do that. It's just we've been using flawed human language to describe this God all the time. And all of this, I'm not even making any moral claim. I'm not talking about anything other than I'm talking about how God views us messing up something that is just so easy to mess up. It's like a gift gone backwards. So I see personally a God who is hardly ever angered by our sexual slip-ups, obviously outside of instances where it hurts someone else or maybe even ourselves. I just see God as someone who can think and use logic and wants the best for all of us. So the funny thing about this interview, I was doing research and I found this awesome Erica. I found her, and basically what was linked to her was something along the lines of purity culture dropout. purity culture dropout. So I was like, oh, okay, this seems like a, ex-evangelical or a deconstructing evangelical, whatever. I'm going to hit her up, ask her if she wants to be on the show. Well, sometimes I don't do the research needed, which I should. And I started talking to her and I asked her about purity culture and I started asking her about church. Bottom line is she really hasn't thought much about purity culture in the context of church. And that was how my whole interview was geared towards, was her and I kind of having this common ground of evangelicalism and then talking about sex. Oh my gosh. So in mid-interview or at the beginning of the interview, I had to throw all of that stuff out and then just decide where I'm going to take it. So here's what I decided. I'm going to ask sexual questions. This is her profession. This is what she talks about all the time. No way I'm going to offend her. Not only was I interested, but I also knew that would be an entertaining show. So you're in for a ride, my friends, or at least I think so. But before we do that, again, I sat down with Robbie and Hayne, and we talked about a lot of stuff, including how my mom almost died. We talked about like last month, and we talked about vaccines and all that stuff. So here's Hayne and Robbie, and then after that, you'll be hearing from Erica Smith. I love you guys. Yes, you listening right now. All right. I'm changing the name of this podcast. It's The Dude Show. It's all things Jesus, beer, brats, and motorcycles. Next week, come to Life Assembly Praise Christ Church, and we're going to drive a motorcycle on the stage in our men's ministry event. You guys coming to that? Hey, I've been at a big men's deal. And at the very beginning, they drove a Harley on stage, and everybody's like, "Yeah!" I'm like, "What is happening right now?
My Lord.
What in the world?"
I'll be like, I'll just wait this one out, guys.
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. So you guys know a little bit about this, but my mom had COVID and like literally almost lost her. Y'all check this out. So I take her and dad to the ER and I sit them down. My mom was able to walk in, holding my arm. So she's literally walking, sits down. I go to the front to check them in. They say, what's her social security number? And I'm like, I don't know. So I go ask her. Guys, she literally went like this, like with her eyes, like couldn't open her eyes and moaned at me. And so I went to get it. I said, "Nurse, we need help right now. Like we need help." And her blood pressure was 69/58.
Whoa.
I mean, she literally was just, I don't know. I mean, Hayne, you're a firefighter, know all the health stuff. Was she dying? I mean, with that sort of blood pressure, was she on the way? Like if we just let her sit at home, she would eventually die, right?
Potentially. I mean, yeah, anytime your blood pressure gets that low, you're moving into some really dangerous space. I mean, that's really low, man. Like, that's super low. The best thing to do for somebody that they're experiencing that is to sit them down or lay them down. So whenever we're laying down, we probably have experienced this just as human beings, and we sit up real quick and we feel real lightheaded. It's because our blood pressure just went from its normal pressure to super low really quick. And then we come out of it, right? So whenever we go on calls and someone's like, "Oh, I'm super lightheaded," and we'll check their blood pressure, and it's that kind of low. It's like, okay, let's lay you down on the ground so we can just kind of naturally get your pressure to rise. But yeah, man, that's low though. The big question is what caused it? Like what caused that to happen to her?
Right.
So.
Well, here's what's crazy, and here's what really this really settled into me and kind of gave me perspective of how crazy and new COVID is, because at one point, my brother talked to the doctor and they literally said, "We are researching COVID and blood pressure because we do not understand why your mom's blood pressure is fluctuating." And I saw that hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, this thing is so new. They're doing research on how to help my mom. I was like, oh my gosh, because her blood pressure was just up and down, up and down. Here's what's interesting. And I guess I'll put it this way. I don't give a shit what people think about my parents. So I think what I've been trying to help liberal people understand, and I mean, I don't know what I am, liberal, I'm conservative, probably economically and, that sort of thing, foreign policy, but liberal minded in a lot of moral things. So my parents did not get vaxxed. And what I have been encouraging people to try to understand is stop thinking right or wrong. If you did not trust something to go inside your arm, would you let them do it? They do not trust it. And so my parents, now my dad, honestly, he heard some sort of weird research I wish he hadn't seen because he was going to get the vaccine, that it can mess up your mental health. And he has mental health problems just like me, like it can interrupt the medication. So, I mean, he heard that and he's like, out, not doing that. My mom said there's just not enough research and everything. And my parents are going to get vaxxed now. Like they walk through it and they're like, oh my gosh. And here's the thing. I also understand people being irritated and saying your mom took up a bed for a whole week and she didn't get vaxxed. And there's people, I get all of that. I get all that. But I just wish at the end of the day, people would realize, hey, people that aren't getting vaccines, they're not saying, hey, I just want to spread COVID around and kill everybody. They're saying, I don't really trust it. I mean, does that rub you guys the wrong way?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. First being, my wife's supposed to have a bilateral mastectomy on Valentine's Day. And we were told that it may not be possible because the staff will be so focused on COVID patients. So, Robbie, my wife has advanced breast cancer, and we're fighting that right now.
Sorry to hear that.
To be completely honest, when I hear that, I kind of lose my mind inside. I get a little enraged. Yeah. And oh man, this is a rabbit hole. But to me, there are people. We do a thing on major incidents in the fire department called triaging. Let's say we go to a bus full of school kids, God forbid, we have to triage them. Who here needs care immediately? Who's the walking wounded? Who can just have their parents pick them up and take them out? We have to triage everybody. And I assume the hospitals are doing that, triaging. But when we have people that need, we're talking about cancer patients. We're talking about we just got to go down the line. Things that are other than COVID, where people need surgeries done. And yes, there are people in the hospital who have been vaccinated, but it's maddening to me when I see younger people, and I know a lot of them because I work with them, who are in the hospital.
That's all right. You can say all people. I'm not going to be mad at you for being mad at my parents. You can lump them all in. It's okay.
It pisses me off when I see how your parents have interacted with this.
Don't you talk about Barbara?
The best possible thing that could have happened if your mom died within 2 days so she could free up a bed.
Yeah.
Did you say that, Hayne?
Yeah, totally. Well,
you typed that in the chat.
Here's the thing. Your parents didn't wear their COVID seatbelts and they got blown through a windshield. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry if someone else at the hospital needs to have an immediate surgery when you weren't wearing your seatbelt. Now that sounds really harsh, and I'm exaggerating a little bit there. But it is hard because we're so deeply affected by the people we love and how they're interacting with this virus. I read a fascinating article 2 weeks ago. It was either in the Times or in the Wall Street Journal, and it was a think tank, just an idea of, because there's so much distrust of the government right now, what if rather than the government handling this vaccine and the information, it was just flushed into the free market, and the free market handled the vaccine? Because there's so much distrust of government right now.
Right.
And I don't know how I feel about that, but it was an interesting thought that if we were to do that, of course, these major corporations want to make money. Of course, they're going to want to push it. There wouldn't be there's going to always be skeptics with vaccines, but there wouldn't be as much information. But we have a firefighter here. He's in his mid-50s. We've had a lot of firefighters hospitalized, older guys. This guy was an anti-vaxxer. I saw him yesterday at the funeral. God, I'm getting morbid here. At a funeral yesterday for a peer of ours in the department who just died of stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Dang.
But this guy that just got out of the hospital, he's lost 40 pounds. He has a little oxygen tank he carries around with a nasal cannula. It's awful. And I asked Kenny, I'm not going to give his last name. I asked Kenny, I said, so how are you dealing with all this? And he said, well, he looked at himself and he said, I don't know of a single person who looks like me because they took a vaccine.
Wow.
And I thought, man, that's a really interesting thought, and it is evolving science. And there are going to be people that have bad reactions to it. Just like you watch any commercial on TV, like for Neulasta, they talk about Neulasta and then the last 30 seconds of somebody rattling off. Side effects may include, it happens. And when we have 60 million people taking something, you're going to have some, reactions.
Yeah.
But that's
I think, this
Robbie, especially you knowing my parents, you're like, my parents love you. You love my parents. Like, how does that land on you? And sorry, if you were going to say something else, go ahead and say that.
I was just going to say, like, I'm kind of in the camp where I've been vaccinated and boosted, and I had COVID, after all of it. But at the same time, like, I just thinking back, you guys were making me think back to 2020, early 2020. Phase 1 was like medical workers. So my wife is a dentist, and so she was included in like phase 1 of vaccines as a healthcare provider. And I remember back then, like, I was pretty fearful of what the vaccine was about. Like, everything was so new. It was,
right.
It was basically survival mode at that point. We were all quarantined. We were, rushing to figure out a solution to it. And so it felt kind of strange, but at the same time, my wife was getting it, and so it was like, I think that there were like so many thoughts going through my brain, of course, because there is the individual choice, but I also feel like there is a sense of duty as well. And certain people have preferences of whether they lean more on duty, whether they lean more on independence. And then you got to ask, like, what is that duty to? Is the duty, when you're thinking of like prioritizing duty, like, what is that duty to? Is it to your country? Is it to science? Is it to the global pandemic? Or, for me in that case, I would say that my duty to my wife was higher than all of that. Right. But, because I was nervous about it, but at the same time, like, I also feel like I can see both sides of everything. Like, because I don't think that, I don't necessarily think that I just think that people's individual cases can get more complicated and more nuanced than we know. Right. And, it can get really complicated, but at the same time with the fear thing, that's human, because like, that's with everything. I would say, like, even with marriage, it was like, I'm not going to get married until I'm ready to get married. It was like, are you ever ready? Are you ever ready to have kids? Are you ever ready to, so there is that balance there, but I will say this, like, when you make a choice, like it does, I would say, like, there's some parts of our population that made the choice not to get vaccinated and still, like, took zero precautions, and like, whoever it is, like, you just never know, like, whatever is like living life normally, not wearing a mask, not, and I think a big part of that, which is a whole nother conversation, is just media influence, because with media influence, there was a lot of fear tactic on both sides of the equation, fear to take the vaccine and fear not to take the vaccine. Right. And I think it was just the big motivator. And it was like, we really have to kind of sift through all of that, to try to figure out what is best and who do we trust, so it's just, it is complicated.
Yeah. Hayne, do you think it should be mandated? Like, do you think it should be law? Once we start making, I think we cease to be America. That's my opinion. Once we make people get the vaccine and say, we are going to put this in your arm, or, you're going to lose your job and your house or whatever, like, that's not America anymore. So that's you've lost your right.
Right. I'm gonna say that no, I don't think it should be mandated, and I really appreciate, because I'm on the same page with Robbie on people's personal choice. Where Robbie was coming from, which is exactly where I come from, is he is. I'm putting words in your mouth, Robbie. So please stop me if I'm like, you're like, that's
no, I won't let him. Go ahead. Just go ahead, Robbie. You cannot respond.
That's bullcrap. To me, the question is, are you others focused in this? Are you engaging this with others in mind, or is it all about you? And I feel like very few people I know on either side, I do know some, but they're weaponizing it either way, and it's all about them. It's been interesting to me, because of what I do for a living. I hear guys say, well, I don't want to do that to myself. I don't want to do that because of the risk I could take. And I kind of laugh. I'm like, risk you could take. You stand on an interstate at car crashes every day. You go into burning buildings. You do all these things that you are willing to risk for the public, for the betterment of others.
Yeah.
But you're not willing to engage, at least consider this as a possibility. And the mandate, I just think it's just too politically hot right now. The reality is that at my job, I had to have a Hep B and a Hep A vaccination to ride a fire truck. I had to.
Right.
I had to have a tetanus shot. Those are things that I had to have. And I don't know. But what I do know is that I really appreciate the posture of, I'm going to engage this, whether I take the vaccine or don't take the vaccine. I'm going to engage it in a way where I'm others focused, and I'm not vaccinated, but I'm going to wear a mask, even though it may be uncomfortable to me. I'm going to wear the mask because there's other people who are fearful, who are concerned, and I want to. And our culture just doesn't value anything others focused anymore. We're so selfish, and I put myself in that. We don't think about other people. And I think about what my grandfather sacrificed, World War II, and our grandparents and the things that they had to give up. And folks are upset that they have to wear a mask in the grocery store for 5 minutes. That just seems really selfish.
And just to respond to your point, Joey, as well, I think that as Americans, there are lots of things that are forced upon us that we just don't pay attention to. They're much worse than vaccines.
Worse. I was going to say stopping at a traffic light sort of thing, but
like slavery.
Okay.
Just to bring her,
Stop at a traffic light, slavery.
1 to 10, boom.
So, we're years past, the emancipation, but how long did that take? That was America.
But to me, that supports my point is that was not good that our government was making people do that.
Yeah, but we never made anybody take the vaccine. We made people slaves, and we had to come out of that.
Gotcha. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? It's like the other way around. Yeah. This is now, we're going to employ a choice, and we're going to give you the option to have this choice, not fight out of the choice, but to, so it's and that's just one random, that's one random.
What, slavery? One random thing?
One random occurrence, example, but there are lots of other things, too, so.
Oh my gosh.
I think when it comes political, it's that is the first thing in our brain, but we don't really think about all the other things. What do we have to do?
Yeah.
You have to carry an ID with you.
Right.
You have to pay taxes. You have to do lots of other things, and so it's just.
Where's the tipping point of what we have to do and what we have freedom to do?
Yeah. Hey, I feel this is just me and how I am with my listeners. I really do feel like I have to say, Robbie's black. That's why I'm laughing about slavery. Robbie's black. It's not 3 white dudes chuckling about slavery.
Oh my God.
Erica, it's good to have you, and I'm always a little afraid to tell people how I found them because it reveals just how unprofessional I am. Here's the thing is, so first of all, Christians are the only people that use the term purity culture, right?
Pretty much.
I think so.
Or people that are concerned about Christianity.
Yeah, there you go. So is that your backdrop? Is that where you came from?
No. So I was raised my family's Christian, but we are not church-going regulars. So my orientation to Christianity has been just this casual cultural relationship with it, where we celebrate Christmas and we go to church sometimes on Christmas Eve. And we know that grandmas go to heaven. That's my relationship.
Right. So with you call it purity culture dropout, right?
Yeah.
So when you name that, are you thinking Christianity, or why are you using the term purity culture. And the reason I ask is there's so many different directions that I could go in this conversation. Like, honestly, sex is a very interesting topic and different questions around that. But if you had a similar upbringing also, I was curious just the negative impact purity culture had on you. But if that's not your upbringing, we don't even have to touch any of that. So I'm just curious where you came up with purity culture.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my relationship to the term is as someone who has worked as a sex educator for many years and also watched purity culture rise in the world around me. So I didn't have any friends that were directly affected, but I was working in this field and I would encounter people who had been raised with very little sex education or very negative attitudes about sexuality. Yeah. And I was also noticing that politically a ton of funding went to abstinence-only education instead of programs that I worked for, which were programs that provided like HIV prevention services. So I could see purity culture rising and gaining power and how that affected people, not as somebody who was in the church, but as somebody that was already working in public health and sex education.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, here's what I'm going to do then is I'm going to kind of take the Christian glasses off and just go the sex route because I have tons of questions in that regard. I have been a Christian for the vast majority of my life, and my listeners are aware of my story. This topic, it hits home for me because I'll be honest, Erica, I don't know the switch in my head from my upbringing. I know that purity culture, where I got it from through the church, was not good. I think it is very much more impactful to the female negatively, but it messed me up pretty bad too.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's harmful to people of any gender. And I've worked with men who have, talked greatly about how it affected them.
What are you talking about when you said even outside the church, there's a building purity culture?
Oh, yeah. So because, America as a country was founded by puritanical people who brought very puritanical values about sex and sexuality, and they are baked into the fabric of our society here. Yeah. So even for people who were not, subject to like purity pledges and youth groups where they, compared you to a chewed up piece of gum, there are still values that get...
It was just the women, by the way. The dudes weren't compared to any of that stuff.
Of course. You got to be the gum chewers.
Right.
But those values still get exported into general American society. So things like shaming women for how they dress and blaming sexual assault on the victim and, having a double standard around sexuality where men are allowed to explore and experiment and women are expected to be pure, but not too pure. All of those things I think they're on steroids in church purity culture, but I see elements of them in like the general American society, even including how difficult of a topic it is for us to talk about sex and how the sex education that we allow young people to receive is like overhyped as a very scary and terrifying thing. Like there are parents who are like, well, I don't want my kid learning about, how to use condoms, or I don't want my kid having conversations about consent. All of that is still like very purity culture based. So, I see it around us, not just in folks who were raised in a church. I think that if you were born and raised, or if you were raised in this country, it's still something that affects you.
Cool. And so just for a little more context, and I promise you, we talk to atheists, Christians, people from all over the map. Would you consider yourself a spiritual person when it comes to anything outside the natural?
That is a great question. And that's a question that I still ask myself all the time.
Right. You're like, you want me to answer that in 10 seconds real quick before we move on? You want me to tell you that?
I'm not a non-believer, but I'm not a clear on what my beliefs are. So It's like, I know my father is very devoted to Christianity in a very like loving way, not in a way that's ever felt oppressive to me.
Yeah.
And my family would consider themselves believers, but I'm just sort of like, if I am going to ever call myself a follower of Jesus, it's the social justice, nice Jesus that was the human, the human Jesus.
Yep, for sure. We could have some good theological discussions, and I could convince you that God was always peaceful, but we'll stick to sex. So
we will, because this is my area of expertise.
There you go. So here's what I want to do. Like we set it up perfectly. I want to leave the spiritual out, like leave anything outside of the natural. Given that this is something that you educate people on, and I mean, you actually consult people, when you look at today's culture, I mean, from all around the world, you got to be thinking, okay, there's a huge group of people that are, first of all, missing out on a lot of fun by just overcomplicating it with maybe guilt or shame, or just constantly think. And it's just like, come on, enjoy it. Like it's how you were naturally made. And then there's a whole nother problem, and that's people taking advantage of other people. And it's like, gosh, me believing in God, I just imagine God being like, how did you mess this up? Like, how did you even mess this up? Yeah. But what is, obviously you care about other people's sexuality, and that's what you're devoting your life on. Like, how do people miss out on a really fulfilling sexual relationship?
That is a great question. I feel like one I got to tackle in a few different parts.
Sure.
So, when I think of the concept of sexuality, the actual having sexual intercourse with people is just one tiny part of what sexuality is to me. So yes, we have messed that up. We have overcomplicated it. But the topic of sexuality and sex education in general, you can divide it up into a lot of different areas. So the intercourse with others is definitely one of them. Right. And learning things about your physical body, your reproductive health, your biology is another one. But then there are other areas of human sexuality that are so important, like our body image, our relationship to ourselves, right. Our feelings about intimacy, the physical sensation of sensual touch,
right.
Talking about things like sexual violence and power and gender roles and expectations, and how power and sexualization can be a very tricky thing. Like there's so much more to sexuality and sex education than just like having enjoyable sexual experiences.
Yeah.
So that is when I work with folks, my goal is to give them information and a place to critically examine all of these aspects of sexuality, and then decide how to best apply those principles to their own lives. And
Gotcha.
So I'm my goal in working with someone is never to be like, well, I want you to go out and have all kinds of great sex that is just totally wild. It's more like, figure out what your comfort zone is and then live most happily in that. And
right.
if, healing from purity culture doesn't have to mean that then you go out and you're like, I'm going to go to sex parties and have like tons of different partners. If that's where you land, I will happily support you in doing that safely. But a lot of people are like, I just want to be able to masturbate and not feel guilty,
Right.
Or I want to have a solid relationship with my spouse where we can communicate clearly.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. So crazy. And it's like, I have like a Christian-ish ethic, and I say ish because I would say a lot of my fellow evangelicals are kind of in a different planet that I am, but still look at the Bible and all of that. And so there's definitely an element of wanting to be committed to the monogamous relationship that I committed myself to. And you mentioned masturbating, and so I've told other people about this, how masturbating, or let's just call it orgasm, it is such a natural stress relieving pain reliever. Like there's literally times where I can sense a migraine coming on and I can take some medicine, lay down and jack off. And that is about what I need for my headache. And sometimes it's like a charm. I'm like, oh my gosh.
And that works for menstrual pain for a lot of people too.
Wow. See, didn't know that.
It can relieve cramps from periods.
Yeah. I did not realize that. It's, we actually just had a conversation on here. A good friend of mine named Hayne, his wife is actually going through chemotherapy. And so he actually brought up the topic of what actually is sex, especially in his situation. And he said something along the lines of it's physical interaction that is unique to your partner. And I was like, wow, that is really, really good. So in other words, let's just say my wife and I, we're in a season where there's not a whole lot of sex for one reason or another. But if I maintain some sort of physical affection that I don't give anyone else, I don't know if I would say sexual, but I could see where he's coming from.
I actually work with people on this topic quite a lot, and I call it expanding our definition of sex. Yeah. Because in a lot of people's minds, sex is when a penis goes in a vagina, and that's all they define as having sex. And that leaves out not only people who are in same-sex relationships, but it leaves out people who enjoy other types of intimacy. So there are other ways to be intimate with people, other ways to give a person sexual pleasure or to give your partner an orgasm. And some of those ways that are the best for women aren't the penis and vagina. So I think if we only define sex as, I like to shorthand it P and V. Right. I'm like, if we're only talking about P and V, we're leaving out the possibilities of pleasure for a lot of us. And it's our bodies and it feels good. And, if you're coming from a Christian perspective, I'm always like, well, if God gave us the ability to feel these wonderful feelings, maybe expand your definition of what sex is.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Do you have, and I, what I'm doing, Erica, now is I just have a ton of things that I want to ask you, and we'll get to some, and because it's just so interesting. There's so many things that I want to ask you. So we kind of got your setup as far as just kind of, very, very snapshot picture of kind of where you're at spiritually. Would you say that you have formed a sexual ethic that you think could apply universally, or what is a good sexual ethic? How do humans steward their sexuality well?
That's a great question. You have
Am I a good interviewer? Because you're saying all my questions are great. So hell yeah.
Whenever someone asks me a question that really makes me sit back and be like, wow, I have a lot to say here. That's when I'm like, that's a great question. Good. And so this is also work I do with people is let's help you develop a sexual ethic that you feel confident in. Because, if the church, and by the church, that's vague, but like if mainstream evangelical Christianity has handed you a sexual ethic and it's all about like, no sex until marriage and purity and, no LGBT, like all of that. Like I always ask folks, like, are there parts of that you want to keep, parts of it that you want to leave behind? Like, other values that you want to live by. And for me personally, my own sexual ethic, I believe strongly in my own values, but I let my clients know that their values don't have to be mine. Right. So for me, it's like valuing autonomy of people and also consent. So basically I'm like, if consenting adults want to engage in sexual behaviors together and they're not hurting other people, I don't have a problem with it. So I don't place value on, particular sex acts or particular sexual fantasies. I'm like, if you are getting enjoyment, if you are not hurting another person, and if everyone involved is consenting, then I'm like, do your thing. And I value, people expressing their gender and sexuality in the way that it feels right to them, pursuing pleasure because pleasure is a wonderful part of life. Right. And not feeling guilt or shame about our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wouldn't that be nice? It is. Gosh, it's just so crazy when you think about how wonderful of a thing this is. And it just, my context is kind of coming from religiosity, but again, it's just like, we're all mishandling this big time. So here's what I would love for you to talk scientifically. And my listeners are typically all from a Christian background, but a lot of them have deconstructed, and they're kind of in a different place. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of them sometimes are a little more conservatively wired, and they just want to hear another perspective. And it seems like there's this mentality in Christians. I would say most of us are at a place now to where we accept that scientifically some people are wired up for same-sex attraction. And my question is, Christians are typically like, okay, well, someone's gay, someone's straight. And I've heard a more fluid explanation where are we going wrong, according to you, when we just break it down to gay and straight?
Scientifically, there is no one, no researcher, no sexologist has ever been able to definitively say, this is a thing that makes a person gay or straight. It is, probably a combination of biological factors and cultural factors. But there's no way to pinpoint, like, this is the gene, it's not a gene like that. There's actually a fascinating thing is that we tend to view biology as as a matter of fact thing. Like, there are people who were, created male and people who are created female, and that's just it. And that's the end of the story. But what we're increasingly seeing through research on sexual biology is that there's even a lot of variation in our hormones and chromosomes among people. So we want nature to have these two very distinct categories. We want nature to be like, there's male and there's female, and a male has XY and gonads, and a female has XX and ovaries. And we're even seeing that there's more people kind of born in the middle than we would ever think. And so that is like the science of our sex. But when it comes to sexual orientation and attraction, there is a lot of variation there as well. And it's only within the late 1800s that we even started thinking of people as heterosexual. That is a relatively new construct. And it was a construct created for some law in Germany that had to do with dividing land or something. It's a very weird story. But the idea that we've modern, this modern idea of there's gay and straight. But it's, people that are in my field are kind of like, why did we ever even create those two categories? Because there is so much possibility so much possibility to have attraction to a wide variety of people, perhaps not for everybody, which is not what I'm saying. But, when we assume that every single person is going to be straight until they tell us otherwise. It's kind of like this, we call that compulsory heterosexual. Yeah, sorry, I have braces now, so I talk funny sometimes.
Awesome.
We call that compulsory heterosexuality. It's just kind of this assumption that everybody's supposed to be straight, and if you're not, you're an outlier. And we're understanding more and more that that's not the case, that folks can become aware of attractions to the same sex or other genders, honestly, at any time in their lives. And it's not that there are just more LGBT people now than there were 50, 100 years ago. It's that we have a much greater understanding of gender and sexuality than we did then. And we have created a society that is more accepting and that folks can see themselves in more, which fosters an environment of having people come out.
Yeah.
So I feel like I answered a lot of questions with.
No. Yeah. Heck yeah, you did. why can't we all slow down and like my mind, I cannot even comprehend what it would be like to be attracted to another guy. I don't have a reference point. I don't know if that looks like, if there's a pendulum, like I'm all the way on the other side. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, that seems to be something that would do all of us so good is, you know, you feel that it's so different. Like you can't imagine yourself. That should validate the fact that for someone else, it really is real, because could you imagine yourself going a different direction in the way that you know, are wired up? And
like, did you choose to be straight?
Right. Yeah.
That's a question I ask always. Yeah. Like, did you, or even the question, this is always one that gets folks, is like, when did you know you were straight?
Right.
You're probably like, it's just part of me.
Right. Yeah. So tell me what you think about this. And I used to be with a podcast called Bad Christian, and we had a couple. I don't know if they're basically Christian swingers.
Okay.
And I think the proper terminology is polyamory.
Uh-huh. There's different, I mean, those mean very different things. So
yeah, probably so. Yeah. The uneducated one here, but it's interesting because I've come in contact with two people that they talk about polyamorous. Mm-hmm. Is that it? So, and they talk about it as that's how I'm wired up.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I'm a little like, I want to respect where someone's at. I'm not in their shoes, but I've had this conversation with lots of women, lots of men, and it's like, I mean, I could probably put myself in that category also. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the difference of being a sexual being and being attracted to many different beings, but then deciding I've committed to this person and this is who I'm going to be sexual with? What's the difference between that and actually saying, I can't help it? Yeah. Like, this is just how I'm wired up. Like, this is who I am.
The difference is really like, it's very personal choice about how you want to live out your relationships and what agreements you want to make with partners. So, I am married and my husband and I are in a monogamous marriage, but we've also acknowledged to each other, like, if we ever have a major attraction to somebody else, like, we would talk about that and see what to do about that. Like, and that's a decision we have made. And there are folks that will say things like you said, like, well, I'm just wired differently, who decide that, polyamory, which means like having multiple relationships with people, is the way that they want to set up their relationships and behave. That's the agreement they want to have. So, when like I'm deciding to be monogamous, you're married, you're deciding to be monogamous. And those are decisions that we have made. But as far as, some people do feel that they're wired monogamously, that once they're really in it and really committed, that there's nobody else on their radar. Yeah. And, it's such an individual thing. Right. And choosing to identify as poly and choosing to live as poly, it is hard to understand for the majority of society, because monogamy is the standard and monogamy is the sort of accepted norm. Right. It's a personal choice, really.
Yeah. Do you, especially in your field, someone, I mean, you would say you're passionate about sex. Like, is it a bummer to be asexual? like, do you ever think when you're talking to someone who's asexual, like, gosh, that sucks. Like,
it's
just
so
to not
weird
have
because
any...
I mean, asexuality is also a thing that is a whole different, it's a whole spectrum of experiences. There are asexual people who are like, I sometimes get aroused and I sometimes masturbate, but I'm just not that driven by sex. Gotcha. There are asexual people who choose to be in relationships with others, and they'll be like, I have a partner and we have sex sometimes, but it's usually not like, I could kind of live without it.
Right.
Yeah. So if they could kind of live without it, then it's not my place to say, oh, you don't know what you're missing. You know what I mean? Because it's not the same to them. So, if someone tells me like, I absolutely hate chocolate, I'm like, you don't know what you're missing, but also because you hate it, then you're not really missing anything.
Right.
It's
Right.
kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Typically people on here that help me host are Christians. And I was by myself with this one. The other two, are Christians also, but we were talking about a Super Bowl halftime show, and I forgot which. I think it was J-Lo, but anyway, very
Shakira.
Yeah, very sexually provocative, very erotic. How do you mesh that with also stamping out the objectifying of women's bodies?
The question of like objectification versus empowerment, that is a timeless question, and one that doesn't have an easy answer. I mean, my
I'm always thinking black and white. I'm always thinking that's not helpful.
I mean, I will tell you this as somebody who has a master's degree in sexuality, has an undergraduate degree in like women and gender studies. This is a thing that I have talked about and pondered for decades, and there's not an easy answer. I mean, I think a lot of it boils down to consent and having control over our own bodies and actions and taking responsibility for ourselves. So, if a person, specifically a woman, wants to put on a very stunning show like those performers and show their bodies, that is their choice. Right. And the folks that watch them, I mean, they can enjoy it. They can find arousal in it, but we have a responsibility not to view the people entertaining as objects. They're still humans. So like, that doesn't mean you can just walk up to J-Lo and Shakira and like touch them. It's like, so there's a responsibility also on the viewer to understand the difference between like, this woman is entertaining me and I'm loving it. And then also knowing that like, well, she has agency, and that doesn't mean that I can just talk about her like she's an object or treat her like she's an object.
Right. Yeah. I think you would appreciate this. We have this analogy that we like to talk about being under the law and then under freedom, like Christ sets us free. So I was jogging, and there was like a stunning woman coming in my direction. And I could just tell this is a woman I am attracted to. Mm-hmm. And I had lived
not asexual.
Right. There you go. So I had lived my whole life. My next response in my brain is, don't look, don't have those thoughts. Don't, because it's wrong. It's forbidden. And, I mean, this is literally, this probably happened 4 years ago. Instead, I flipped it and I said, you know what? In this moment, and I don't know exactly, I'm not talking morals or anything necessarily, making any sort of moral statement, but at this moment, I'm choosing not to look at her because I don't want her to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And I also don't want her to feel objectified. And it was like night and day jogging by her, because all of a sudden my lust problem was I made my life about caring about her, and it wasn't about me. And I think that's why purity culture has just gotten so out of whack, because women are the problem. Mm-hmm. They're just the problem. They're the ones that dress a certain way. They're the ones that act a certain way. Women are always the problem.
It's really cool the way you were able to be like, well, I'm attracted to her, but I also don't want to make her feel unsafe.
Right.
I mean, like, that's not that difficult.
Right. And I did another thought that I had was, I also want, as a monogamous relationship with my wife, I want her to feel like I am committed to her also. Mm-hmm. Tell me some of the health benefits of regular orgasms.
That's a great question. There have actually been a few studies that show that men who orgasm regularly may have a slightly lower rate of prostate cancer.
Wow.
And then there's the immediate effects. It is stress relief. It is a flood of endorphins. It is relaxation. It's, it can lighten the mood. Like I'm like trying to rattle these off of the top of my head. Yeah, honestly, like stress relief and relaxation is a big one. And I know that like falling asleep can often be aided by the all full body release and relief you get from having an orgasm.
Yeah.
But there isn't like what is a good number to have? Because, there are folks that are like, yeah, maybe I'm just not that sexual and I don't feel the need to do it very often. But, even like orgasm daily or multiple times a day is not harmful.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny, Erica, I wouldn't have too many guests on here and ask such open questions about sex, but this is your thing. So I'm just, hey, I'm going all out here.
And I'm glad you are. I mean, I always remind my clients, like, they come to me mostly because sex is a really uncomfortable topic for them, but I've been in this field for 20 years and I've talked about everything you can imagine with people of every age and every background. And it's very difficult to like make me uncomfortable with a sexuality topic.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about a man's sexuality, it's what I've lived with. And it's kind of like you get aroused, you're able to devote some time, whether it's with a person or yourself, more arousal, climax, and then pretty much you're done for a little while. Where obviously most all my listeners are adults. You know how women work. Is there something that a woman can do mentally to be more susceptible to orgasms?
So many thoughts here. First of all, what you were talking about with like men getting aroused, having an orgasm, and then having a period of downtime.
Right.
We call that a refractory period. And the older a man gets, the longer that refractory period is.
Right.
So maybe when a guy is 20, he can have an orgasm and then immediately become aroused again and have sex again. Whereas sometimes, if a man is, and I'm 42, so I'm not like talking crap on old people, but like, if a man is 40s, 50s, 60s, sometimes it might be a whole day before there's the possibility of another arousal cycle. But for women, it is different. There's no refractory period like that exactly. And it's such, again, everything about sex is so individualized and so personal. So I can speak generally, but there are going to be some women who, might have an orgasm after arousal and then be like, okay, I feel good and I'm done. But I mean, the biological reality is that like more pleasure is possible for most people. It's just like, do they want to do that or not?
Right.
So yeah, like the sexual response cycle is what we call that. And it does look different in women than it does in men.
Yeah. Is it, I guess it would have to do more with how far into it you are, but I'm curious, like, is it harder for a male to stop? Because that's interesting because, a woman can have an orgasm and then 5 minutes later, another one. So it's like anytime they stop, they could be stopping before another opportunity, so to speak, where it seems like with a guy, because of the different functions from a male to a female, is it harder, or there's probably no research or anything? I
mean, the thing about this is like, if a guy is, I feel like that's dangerously near a purity culture value that I hear sometimes, which is like, once a man is aroused, it is a done deal. It's like a train off the tracks and he has to do it. But I feel like in reality, we have more self-control than that. It might be uncomfortable to stop, but you also have agency to be like, all right, fine. Like, I am aroused. This does feel good. But you won't literally die. If it's not like you have to go and you have no choice in the matter. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, take into account the lives people have, children, and schedules. And, that brings up another topic, which is that scheduling sex with your partner is a very normal, healthy thing to do. And it doesn't point to like a sad demise in a sexual relationship. This is the thing that I tell folks all the time, is that because not everyone gets aroused spontaneously. By that, I mean, the feeling of I'm sitting there, I have a sexual thought, and suddenly I feel my body responding and I'm ready to go. That's how some of us work. Yeah. But for women in particular, not all women get that like spontaneous sexual desire. What they have is something that's more responsive, meaning if they're in the situation and sexual things begin happening, then they become aroused.
Gotcha.
There's an entire book about it called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. And this book is life-changing. I recommend it to my clients all the time. So especially if you have women who are like, yeah, like my husband like wants to have more sex and I want to have more sex. I just don't get in the mood. One of the suggestions in this book is like, set an intentional time for sex. And within that time, begin, activity with your partner, and then you may get aroused. But if you sit around waiting to just spontaneously get in the mood, it's not as likely to happen for women.
Yeah. For an older guy like me too, I heard, and I'm sure this is common knowledge for you, like, let's say that it's more difficult for Priscilla and I to engage sexually. Does it help my libido if I continue to have orgasms like daily? Isn't that something to where if you're having those regularly, then your body craves it regularly, almost like a medicine?
I tend to find this true. Like the more it's a part of your life, the easier it is to keep that momentum up.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. So last two questions. Is this like the most bizarre assortment of questions you've ever received? And then second of all, tell my listeners like exactly what you do and where they can go and how they can benefit from your resources. It's been awesome.
Yeah, sure. So this is not the most bizarre collection of questions. I have worked with teenagers for the majority of my career. And I actually just did a sex talk at a college a couple days ago. And that was a pretty broad assortment of questions. So yours weren't that out of left field.
Right.
It's pretty typical.
Good.
What I do is I am a sexuality educator. I have a master's degree from Human Sexuality Center for Human Sexuality Studies. Yeah. And I have been working in this field for a very long time. Currently, I offer private individualized sessions, and I run a program called Purity Culture Dropout, which is the goal of that program is to provide people with all of the sex education and messaging that is shame-free that people who grew up in purity culture missed out on. And so I am teaching a class online at the beginning of January for people who have never had their first time and who are nervous about their first time. And I know I get a lot of folks who were like, well, because of purity culture, I'm still a virgin and I'm 30 and I really want to know what's up. So that's what my next class is about. So you can find me on my Instagram at Erica Smith Sex Ed and my website at purityculturedropout.com. And I keep it updated with, my classes, my offerings, and for people who want to like book a private session.
Awesome. All right. So that does lead me to one follow-up. Where do you put this in your head? Like you're obviously your field is sex. Sex drive is a real thing, and you may have someone with good intentions going into something. You may have somebody with bad intentions from the start, but you always have to have in your mind, if a male reaches out to you for consultation, like what are some parameters that you have? Do you meet with them one-on-one, and do you do a background check, or how do you figure that part out?
Great question. So, it's virtual. Everything I'm doing.
All of it's virtual. Gotcha.
It is virtual, except for my like speaking engagements, which are always like in group settings. And I do a lot of trainings and, stuff like that. But when I can tell the difference between when a man is being a creep and when a man wants genuine work from me, because, it costs money to meet with me. They're not going to pay my rate just to get in there and like try to like touch themselves in a Zoom call. You know what I mean? Right. I get the most in my DMs on Instagram, that's where the pervs go. So I can tell who they are. Sometimes they send me unsolicited photos. Sometimes they're just like, hey, I want to ask you a question. And I'm like, I'm not here for that. Like, I'm a professional. This is my business. This is my livelihood. And I am very good at being professional about it. So if you're looking for like, there are women that you can pay to have sexy conversations with you. That's a different field.
Right. Well, I tell you what, thank you so much for helping so many people with something that's obviously very, very important. A gift that we only have, 75 years tops to enjoy, you know,
and I just want folks to have I want folks to have a healthy relationship with themselves and with their sexuality and whatever that looks like for them.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Cool.
And I really didn't know what to expect. I hope you enjoyed it because I really, really enjoyed it.
I did. Awesome. It was great. Cool. I mean, I get interviewed fairly regularly by so many different kinds of people. Some are like Christians, some are clergy, some are other sexuality professionals. And it's just always like, I never know what I'm going to get. And this was definitely just like hanging out with a bro kind of conversation.
Cool. Good.
Running with the creeps and the talkies. Ladies got a thing for the small kids. We could take a ride somewhere. Lose time. Let's go. Never make it on my own. Take it slow.
On the floor with the devil, I'm dancing. Tonight I'm taking chances. Ain't real with romancing. Accepting your advances. Not trying to take advantage. On the floor with the passion, no. On the floor with the devil, I'm dancing. Tonight I'm taking chances. Ain't real with romancing. Accepting your advances, not trying to take advantage. Go with the flow, baby, we don't plan shit, no.